Hello, hello. Welcome to Gentle Power, a new episode. Today we have Mariane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I was just on your workshop, Q&A and a panel. Was it yesterday already? And yeah, I was editing it last night and you said, can you do the intro because you've done so much? And I feel the same way. Can you do your own intro because you've done so much?
Of course. So I've been leading engineering teams in the Bay Area for the last 15 years. I've led engineering team through 6 different exits. My last role as an engineering leader was at Mindbody, where they hired me as the head of engineering for their SF office. And then I grew their SF office, then their New York office, then their Pune office. And then I started Women Founders Bay to really help promote women in entrepreneurship. But then I quickly realized it's not enough to have our own group. Let's create really a more inclusive tech industry by creating a group that elevates women. And that's what Founders Bay is about.
Mm-hmm. Love that. So is Women Founders a subset of Founders Bay or is different things?
So Women Founders Bay is a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And basically what we do with a nonprofit is all of the Founders Bay events. We give women free access to those events. We give them free demo tables. Yeah. And then with Founders Bay, the way that we're elevating women is that we are putting them on panels. We are giving them speaking opportunities. We are featuring them in the newsletter. Yeah. And really creating a tech industry where women and men both are represented equally and both are empowered to shine.
Yeah, I love that. And right before we started recording, you said something so cool. You've been engineering lead for a long time and you have seen and interviewed and hired a lot of engineers. Can you go into, you said something like you've noticed women don't negotiate as much?
Definitely. So when I started my career as an engineer, so I went to engineering college at McGill, and I remember my first class ever, I go in with my mini skirt and I look at the class and I was the only woman there and the whole class turned around. And I'm like, where are the women here? So I thought it was going to change after I graduated, and then I moved to SF and it was the same. So throughout my entire career, my goal was to always promote more women in tech so women don't feel left out like I did. Mm-hmm. So when I joined Mindbody, basically I had full control over the budget and the hiring decision, and we were able to build a team of 55% women engineers.
Wow.
And every single woman that we hired, we promoted. So it taught me a lot about, okay, well, how do you really create a diverse engineering team? And how do you make sure that women are paid equally than men? Because right now, as it stands, women only make 88 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. And I think this number is not increasing year over year. Right. So I dedicated basically my entire career to really helping promote women in tech.
Oh, wow. That's so special. Thank you for what you do for women's equality. I looked into the data a few years ago, and there's only 30% women in tech. The fact that you went above 50%, you went to 55%, I can't imagine all the things you had to go through to push for that, because I'm sure you had some pushback. Can you talk more also about, well, maybe a little bit of that, but also the negotiations? What did you notice? Any trends? Both from women negotiating, men negotiating, but also internally? Was HR over your career? It doesn't have to be just at Mindbody, but was there pushback from on the back end?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough that Mindbody really supported me, and I never went and said, hey, I'm going to hire 55% women engineers, right? But I wanted to hire the best engineers on the job. But in order to do that, how do you make sure that you hire more women? Well, you first need to start by building a basically recruitment funnel that has as many women come in as men, right? And then not only that, but then how do you devise a interview process that is free of bias? Because there's so much unconscious bias that happen, especially in engineering, where let's say a woman is more assertive or is equally assertive as a man, then people are gonna look at her and they're gonna say, well, she's too aggressive, right? She's not being nice. But if they look at men, they're gonna say, oh, well, he's a leader, right? I love how tough he is. Mm-hmm. So women always have this unconscious bias that they have to go through. So we made sure that our entire interview process up to them getting an offer was free of bias, and that includes negotiation. Mm-hmm. And one trend that I saw is, let's say a man, is 6 months out of school, right? They will go and they will give us a salary band or an ask that's maybe as high as a senior engineer. But then a woman who's maybe a senior engineer, she would come in and she would give us a salary ask that's as low as that man. So women are always trying to be as fair as possible. And we also have a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Because again, throughout our entire career, every time we're assertive, people are telling us we're being unethical, or people are telling us like, hey, why are you so aggressive, right? So we are like kind of taught to be as fair and as nice as possible, and that translate into us asking less salary. So at Mindbody, basically what we did is we made sure that every job had a clear salary band, and that also every time we gave an offer to a woman, we made sure that it's equal to the same to the man who's doing the same job. Even if she asked for 30K less, I would actually go in the interview and I would tell her, you're asking too little. Like, you should be getting this much. Why are you asking so little?
That is so wonderful. As people know, we work with hundreds of clients. Occasionally, I will hear people, very rarely, I will hear people say, the hiring manager told me to negotiate. And I'm like, who are these angels? And you're one of them. The fact that you tell them like you should negotiate, that is so special. And it's not just about that 30K, but that 30K is going to compound throughout her career, because all the promotions, all the raises, everything, even cost of living adjustments, which is usually 3%, it will be based off their current salary, and then investing that money, and that will be worth millions at some point.
Exactly. But not only that, but every time a woman would come in, right, and then I would ask her, what do you want to be? What is the next step in her career? And women are always, I would say, they're more humble, right? And they're more empathetic. And they would say like, oh, maybe in 2-3 years, I want to be a senior, or maybe I don't know my career path. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you want to be a manager? Why don't you want to be an executive, right? Let's get you this career path. Because women never heard that, hey, you know what? You can be a manager next year.
Yeah.
So it's not only in terms of giving them more salary, but giving them that confidence and telling them, hey, just aim higher, right? There's nothing, you are amazing the way you are, and you can do this job, and kind of talking them out of this imposter syndrome that lives so prevalently in women and in us, because I even have that sometimes.
Yeah, I have that too. I was going to give an example, which is very early in my career, almost right after college. I was interviewing with Meta, and the hiring manager was interviewing me, and they're like, what's your vision for the next 5 years? And I said something like, oh, I'm not sure I want to stay at this role. And I didn't get the job. I think I was debriefing with Alex, and we were thinking, what would have been a better answer? I'm like, of course I want to be manager, but I didn't want them to feel threatened that I wanted their role. And then I caught myself, why did I think like that? In 5 years, maybe they won't be there at all. Another thing I wanted to mention, to touch on what you said, I don't know if you knew this, but I went to women's college. I went to Wellesley College undergrad.
Love that.
And I got a degree in math. And I tell everyone, I don't think I would have had a degree in math if there were men around, because my experience in high school, even though it was in Albania, it was that the loudest person in the room is a man. They're taller, they're louder, they take up more space, they have more presence in the traditional way of presence that we think. And so I think I would have been probably, I guess I can never be very good at math. But going to women's college, all the rock stars were women. Professors were women, most of them. You know, the loudest, the tallest, a woman. And so I felt so empowered.
Yeah, so let me tell you a story about my math class. So again, I was probably one of 2 women in math class. And one time I went to my teacher's office hours, and he had the picture of his daughter on his desk. And I went to ask him a question, and he's like, well, women are naturally not as good at math as men are. So maybe that's why you're not getting it.
What?
And I told him, I looked him in the eyes, and I'm like, is that what you want to tell your daughter? Is that the example that you want to set? So then after that, I went and I studied on my own. I aced that math class, and then I started tutoring the other men around me. But I think that as a woman in math or engineering or in these male-dominated field, from the start, from the time you're a student, you're always being doubted upon,
Yeah.
right? So of course, when it comes to then negotiating your salary, you had to be so strong to get to this point,
Yeah.
right? And then you had to learn how to be nice without being aggressive, but also stand up for yourself. And
It's an
so hard.
impossible balance.
It's an
Yeah.
impossible balance
Yeah.
that I think when it comes to then, okay, well, now you're at a point of negotiating, maybe the fight is out of you at this point, right? And you just want
You just
to just
want
get
a
the
seat
job.
at the table to
Exactly.
begin with, let alone
Exactly.
an equal seat. It makes me very sad that a girl dad, as they call it nowadays, he had a girl and he still believed that. There are some studies actually that show that girl dads are more feminist than other dads who don't have girls, but it's hard to measure.
I remember when you told me about choosing your math degree and you went back home to Albania. And I think it was one of your father's friends, and he asked you, "Oh, what are you studying in college?" You said math, and the immediate reaction was, "Oh, it's because your dad told you to do it, right?" It was something along those lines, like you obviously yourself couldn't have chosen this degree. It must have been your father, the man who influenced that.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing a summer internship and my dad's friend was on my team and he's like, "What are you studying?" I'm like, "Math." And he's like, "Oh, your dad chose that for you?" I'm like, "Why?" For the record, it was not my dad. My dad wanted me to study econ. So how did you get into engineering? And would love to hear some negotiation examples from you. You negotiating things.
Definitely. So I got into engineering because of my dad, actually. So my dad in Lebanon, he was a dean of engineering. And I remember since I was 8 or 9 years old, I would be correcting his electrical engineering homework with him. And then in high school, I took a coding class and I fell in love with coding. So I decided I wanted to be like my dad. And even though, you know, I'm Arabic, so we come from a different culture where women have different expectation. My dad always told me, you have to be independent no matter what, right? Go study engineering, become powerful so that no man can dictate what you can do or what you can do. So my dad inspired me my entire career. But even though, you know, my parents supported me, I remember at that point I was director of engineering and I was managing hundreds of people. And then when my family would introduce me, right, they would tell me, "Oh, hey, this is Mariane. She is married and she has 2 kids." They wouldn't talk about me being a director. It didn't matter in this society. All it mattered is that I fulfilled this woman duty of being married and having kids. So I 100% like, when you come from these different type of culture, it's hard to be recognized for your career success because you are basically being recognized not because of your career, but you're being recognized whether you kind of fulfill like this woman duty or this woman expectation. But my dad always supported me and promoted me. Okay, negotiation tactic when I had to negotiate. All right, this is funny. So I moved to San Francisco and I wanted an internship. And basically,
What stage in your career were you? Like right
yeah.
out of college?
So I was still a student.
Okay.
And I was still a student at McGill in Canada. And then
Great school.
I wanted an internship here in San Francisco. And at that time, the US was still recovering from a recession. So then nobody was hiring, and let alone like why would they hire someone from another country when there's visas and everything. So what I did, I'm like, okay, well, what can set me apart from everybody else? So I actually printed my resume. I printed 50 copies of my resume and I went downtown and I knocked at offices.
Literally.
I literally knocked at offices and I gave my resume until one person called me and they're like, "We're not hiring, but we were so impressed by what you did that we want to give you an interview." So I interviewed and I passed the interview. They created this role for me and I was so grateful. And at the end of my internship, they said, "Mariane, we love you. We want you to come back. What do you want to come back after school?" And at that point, I was still an intern. I looked my boss in the eye and I'm like, "I want to be an engineering manager."
Oh,
This is the only way I will come back to this role is if I'm an engineering manager. And at that point,
like
I wasn't
managing people?
like,
Already?
like I wanted to be an engineering manager and I was not going to let anything stop me. And maybe I was so naive at that time. And obviously he didn't give me the engineering manager. I ended up going as another role for different reasons, but I had this mindset that I want to become an engineering manager, and it wasn't really for me. My idea was like, if I become an engineering manager, I can bring more women up with me. So let me try to get as high as possible so that I could do that. So when negotiating, I always thought about what is the worst case that could happen, right? What is the worst case if I go tell as an intern, please promote me to a manager? The worst case is he's going to say no, right? And that's not a bad case at all. But the best case scenario is they're going to say, well, we can't give you maybe this engineering manager role, but we can give you a path to get there, or they will help you get there. And that boss, he looked at me and he's like, listen, I believe in you, right? You can do it. And I gained his respect that even like now I messaged him for the Giga party that 13 years later, and he responded right away. So that's what goes in my negotiation mind.
Well, I'm very inspired by your boldness, and you were saying, obviously he didn't give me the job or anything, but you shot your shot, you went for it, and I'm reminded of a quote. It's from a movie called Amazing Grace, covering the bio of William Wilberforce, who helped end the slave trade in Britain. This kind of turning into a history podcast. But basically, one of my favorite quotes was, we're too young to realize that certain things are impossible, which is why we will do them anyway. You still had this goal. You just went for it, you said, maybe I was too young to realize that it wasn't really within reach, but the fact that you actually went for that kind of set your baseline of what you felt was possible to get. And I think having that mindset also drives the negotiation, and you're coming into it from a place of higher perceived leverage for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And then in my next job, so the first job I got out of college, after 8 or 9 months of me proving myself, and I had a year of experience, I went to my boss and I told my boss, listen, I want to become an engineering manager as soon as possible. I need to get to senior level. Give me the senior level role.
Wow.
And then they're like, what? I'm like, listen, I've been leading this and this and this project, right? Now you want me to take on extra responsibility. I don't want the money. I just want the title.
Yeah.
I don't care about the money. I don't care about anything else. And at that point, my manager, because I took on extra projects, they actually gave it to me.
Wow.
So within a year, I became a senior engineer, which allowed me to then go to my next role to get the lead engineer. So within 2 years, I was a lead engineer. And then I continued pushing. I want to be an engineering manager. I want to be an engineering manager. Okay. And then the next big jump in my career, I actually was not an engineering manager. I got the director of engineering, because when they offered me the engineering manager role, I told them I don't want the engineering manager role. I want to be a director of engineering.
By this point, you're like,
So
just
at
make me
this point,
CEO.
It doesn't really matter.
My new goal is CEO.
Exactly. So it's always like push higher, but also I never cared about salary. And that's the thing, because people don't understand it. The titles will matter more in your next role. So I always knew that the next role, my salary probably doubles. So it doesn't matter what you're doing now. So just having that in mind when you're negotiating, the title is actually more important than money.
I was going to say that we have also observed that there's not a super strong correlation between title and pay. In our case, because we work mostly with execs in tech and some mid-careers, we've seen, for example, our typical persona is they're at Meta and they apply to Google, and Google, because it's a very tough hiring environment right now, gives them a lower title and a lower pay. But then with our help negotiating their offer, they end up making more than they were making at Meta, even if the title is lower. But I think what you're talking about is that jumping around gives you better pay for the same role, which I fully agree with. And it's easier to get promoted at a role where you've already proved yourself. That game is well proven, and we agree with that. But I was going to ask, I sense almost like an internal hustle that you have, almost like an internal negotiation strength. When people ask me how I went into negotiations, I say, well, I got trained at MIT, and then I love behavioral sciences. I read on it, but also my Albanian side and being an immigrant, I think both of those things contributed to. Would you say that maybe your background or your culture has helped with your hustle?
100%. So I grew up in a civil war in Lebanon.
What? Me
Yes,
too.
I actually was
Not
born
in
in a
Lebanon.
civil war. You too in Albania, right? And until I was 6 or 7, we were, going from war bunkers to war bunkers, and then finally one day our building got bombed and we barely made it alive. Like, we don't know how we survived. So my mom took us, and she's such a strong woman. She went to the Canadian embassy and she refused to leave until we all could get out. So we got visa to come to Canada. But at that point, my dad could not come with us. So we had to leave my dad behind, right? And my dad is my superhero. And that was really tough. And then when we came to Canada, we did not have anything, because when you come from a war-torn country, like, which money do you have, right? So then we went to the Arabic ghetto at that point. And because a lot of men were left behind, a lot of women needed to kind of provide for their family, but because they weren't as educated, I really saw families struggle. And I really saw families struggle because the women could not provide for the family. So growing up in this environment, I saw how much benefit there is to society when women are educated, when women are powerful, and also coming from an Arabic culture where you are told what to do as a woman. You have this expectation, and going to Canada where the women are free, I think it showed me that, hey, there is another way of living. So since I was 7, I was reading about women's rights and how do you empower women to kind of just grow and be powerful. So since I was 7, my passion was really to help promote other women. And I wanted to get to director of engineering, to be an engineering executive, not because I cared about the title, not because I cared about the salary, but the power that it gave me to promote other women. And that's what I'm doing now at Founders Bay. So my hustle comes from maybe knowing my culture and knowing that the culture that I come from is not fair to women, and women need to be empowered to create better societies. And that kind of is my guiding light and my North Star. And that's the impact I want to leave to the world, is I want to make it better for all women, for the women in tech, for women here. And then I want to go back to my country, to the Arabic world, and do the same thing for women there.
Yeah, that is so special, because a lot of people say, I want to help women, I want to help women. But you both have your background in you've seen the power of women and also the drawback of women not being able to support their families. You've seen it with your own eyes in front of you, in your community. And also throughout your career, you help women achieve so much. I love when it's backed, the values are backed with action. And I was going to say, your mom, when you were talking about your mom knocking on the embassy, I'm like, a couple of decades later, you were knocking on offices doors with your resumes. Like mother, like daughter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
She was like, I will not leave this embassy until you get me out. And I'm like, I will not leave this office building until you get me a job.
Yes.
That's true. It's very similar. I love that
beautiful.
comparison.
Yeah. Would love to hear about more negotiations. Alex, did you have any questions?
So earlier you had mentioned about how there's this bias against women. When a woman negotiates, then people perceive her as too assertive or too aggressive. But for guys, it's like, oh, he has leadership skills or whatnot. With you, I can just tell that you bring this hustler attitude in a way that really serves you. And especially when you were an engineering manager and you're interviewing candidates, especially women candidates, what are some things that women candidates and job seekers did where they negotiated very effectively in a way where perhaps even subconscious biases weren't working against them?
I would say not necessarily in the negotiation part, but women, we are very empathetic and natural. We are good with people, right? So when women were going through the job interviews, they had amazing people skill set, where sometimes maybe like a man engineer has less of this people skill set. And that's huge in interviews, because part of hiring is not only hiring in engineering, for example, for skill set, but also for culture fit, because you don't want to hire an employee that will poison the culture. Right. So I would say women tended to be more like natural. We're connecting better to interviewers, etc. with that. When I was hiring engineers, I was at a point before COVID when engineering talent was so rare, and every engineer that I knew had maybe 10 offers, right? So when you were hiring as a hiring manager, you were competing against the Meta and the Google and all of the salaries. What I loved about some women who did really well is that they knew their value. So they came in and they're like, listen, right? Like, I know I can get 10 other offers. And yeah, you know, I had another offer that was like 180,000, but I want to join your team because your team is more diverse, because your team is XYZ. So this technique where they're like, hey, I know I can get better offer, but for me, it's not as important.
They're making you feel special.
Exactly. What's important is the culture. What's important is my ability to move up. I think that created a lot of respect for them as a hiring manager, but also I learned a lot about how do you yourself as a hiring manager, when you're hiring for scarce roles, how do you convince them? And I could not compete with the Meta, and I could not compete with the Google. So the way that I negotiated back is that I always ask them, like, what motivates you, right? Because some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by power. Some people are motivated by the mission. And what I absolutely loved about interviewing women is the majority were really passionate about the mission.
Yeah.
Right? Women are very mission oriented. And I can see it in my Women Founders Bay community, where maybe 4 out of 5 women, they started their company not because they want to become like the next Steve Jobs, because they have a personal mission. So women are very mission oriented. So like when I was negotiating to hire them, I would point to the mission, and I would point to it, the diversity. And I would also make sure that our panel always had half women represented. Because let's say I'm a women engineer, right? And I have 10 offers. Why would I choose a company if I go through the interview process and I don't see myself represented? So our interview process represented the real world. So by the time the women got an offer, even if it was sometimes 50 or 60K less, they're like, well, wait, I can belong here because I see myself represented. And we were able to close more women engineers that way.
Yeah, and I can get promoted and all that. Exactly. Can we do a quick matrix of what have you seen women do well and not well, and what have you seen men do well and not well in negotiations?
Yeah, so I would say what women do really well is, okay, so this is very important to understand, is this unconscious bias that exists when women is being offered a job, right? She's being offered a job not because of potential. She's being offered a job because what she did in the past. The men, when they're up for promotion or when they're being offered a job, they're typically offered that job based on potential, right? So what a woman has to do really well is explain her past accomplishments, right? Because that's how she is judged at that point. So women do really well at saying, okay, well, this is what I accomplished. This is what I did, and I did X, Y, Z, and I accomplished X, Y, Z, etc. And they're really good at that. But then when it comes to asking for what they want, I feel like women really undersell themselves sometimes.
Yes, for sure.
And it's the opposite for men. A man, he's like, oh yeah, I've been an intern for a year. I want 180K. So like men really go in and say like a very high number. So when you see this high number, you're like, whoa, well, I have to meet them like somewhere close by.
Yeah,
and
they're
women,
anchoring, right? The concept of anchoring. Yeah.
Exactly. But then the woman, even though she sells herself like better with her accomplishments, I feel like because she aims so low, then you're kind of, I had to actually, when I started negotiating with them, I had to negotiate higher for what they asked because I'm like, you're asking too low for that band. Like, wow. So I would, and even now when I see that for women founders, like every time I review a pitch deck, the woman is like, oh, I'm making $1 million ARR. So I will make 10 million in 3 years. And then the man is like, oh, I'm pre-revenue, but I'll make 100 million in 3 years. If you see that, that's what I'm telling the women, aim higher, aim for as high as possible, sell the dream. We know what you accomplished. Like I could see your accomplishments, but aim higher.
Yeah. I mean, they've shown this in studies for how men and women apply to jobs differently. A woman will apply only if she meets maybe like 90 something percent of the requirements or 100%, versus men will apply even if they meet like 70% of the requirements.
Sometimes 20%
Yeah.
even. So that's another way. Like, okay, how did I hire as many women engineers? Even my job posting was removed from unconscious bias. So I on purpose put everything in nice to have, because I knew that women would not apply
Oh, wow.
if it was like needed to must
Yeah.
have. So we changed it
Oh, wow.
to put it to nice to have, and the must have were just qualification that everybody would have, so that women were not turned away from that job description. And another thing that we did is we noticed a lot of job description are written basically by men. So a lot of them are like, hey, we're looking for a rock star, we're looking for a hacker, we're looking for
Yeah, but
like
women don't identify as a
women-
rock star. We're taught to be so humble. So
exactly.
yeah.
I'm not a rock star.
Yeah.
I'm not a hacker. Like, you know what? I'm not. I'm a Taylor Swift fan. Like, so we removed all these like very manly word from the job description, and that's why we were able to hire so many women.
Yeah. That's super cool. And then, is there anything men are not doing well in negotiations?
So I did see some men being too assertive, like aggressive basically. I would say, well, what do you care about, right? And all they would say is like salary, like, I want 180K. I'm like, well, would you take like 160, but I will work on a career plan for you to make sure that you get promoted.
Right.
And some men are like, no, all I care about is salary. Like, I want 180K and I don't care about the rest, and I don't care about equity. So I would say when a candidate does that, when they're like, I'm not flexible on anything else and all I care about the salary, then as a hiring manager, you're like, well, is he gonna really, help benefit the culture, or is he just taking that for the money? And you don't really want that to manage that. You don't want somebody like that on your team.
Yeah, something that we often say, I think almost in every single podcast and newsletter, is you always want to show excitement and enthusiasm for the role, especially in this really tough market where there are more candidates than job openings. So you have many people apply. And so by the time you get to the final round and they've interviewed all the candidates, everyone from a technical and skills and expertise perspective, they're already fully qualified. So then what is the differentiator? It's how much do we think that this person will do well in the role, will be a pleasant coworker, will be a motivated employee. That really aligns what you said, instead of kind of playing hard to get or being very aggressive, but to show a lot of that excitement.
Yeah, and another also thing that happened is like when people name drop, but they also fake name drop. Like, I got this offer from there.
Oh, wow.
And
so they're lying.
Yes. And then one time it actually happened to me where somebody wanted to basically get me to join one of their like groups of engineering executive. And they're like, we have the CTO at this company. And this company, the CTO was my ex-husband, right? So then like I went to my ex-husband and I was like, well, you know what?
Like, are you part of this?
Are you part of this? And he's like, I never heard of this person. And then not only that person like lost all respect for me, but also right now we can like actually sue for defamation.
Wow.
So like, don't name drop if it's fake, because especially in San Francisco, it's such a small circle, and people will always do backdoor references. And that's, I think, what candidates don't realize. As a hiring manager, before hiring somebody, I always found out who do I know that knows that person that I can ask about that person. So do not name drop if it's not real.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say do not lie about having another offer. Do not lie about anything, because it's such a small world. It's a long game, and who knows how they might find out. But they might also find out from your micro expression. So if you're negotiating with a recruiter who is negotiating day in and day out, they can pick up on your micro expressions that you don't even know about. Then you also have to build a whole universe. It's just me being pragmatic. Why not to lie beyond ethical reasons? You need to build a whole universe of like, okay, you have another offer. Well, when does it expire? When's the deadline and all that? Another thing we tell our clients is to not play it cool, but show excitement, like we were saying. Do you feel like men versus women play it cool more? Like, oh, I have a lot of other opportunities, or not necessarily?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like women lie less. So they're like, sometimes they're like, no, I don't have another opportunity. And maybe I'm
too
not
honest.
Yeah, they're too honest. And I'm only getting paid like 130K. So I would be so
no.
grateful if I got as much or
Yeah.
a little bit more. And
Yeah.
they would be like so honest and so vulnerable. And like, I love that. I love this vulnerability and
Right.
honesty. But sometimes in negotiation, you don't necessarily want to show your cards
Right, for
first,
sure.
right? You want to see what they offer you. You never want to say the first number.
Yeah.
So I would say definitely I see that for women, but at the same time, it's our superpower. Is
Right.
we're more empathetic. We're maybe a little bit more honest
Yeah.
sometimes.
Easier to work with.
We're easier to work with.
Yeah. More empathetic leaders too. When you said that women share their salary proactively, I have seen that when I have helped hire engineers. And just a quick detour is that in many major states in the US, it is illegal for companies to ask you about your salary history because some whatever angels out there went and put it into legislation for companies to be illegal to ask you that. Do not proactively offer that. Like this legislation is trying to protect your leverage in negotiations.
Exactly. So yes, do not say the first number. And I think in California, you can't now ask how much money you're making to a candidate. You can't. So don't just offer it. Yeah, wait to hear the first
reason
number.
why it's illegal. Exactly.
And I think one of the things that I tell women when kind of I mentor them is if somebody asks you like, or try to get how much money you're making, instead revert to how much money you want. Like, you know what? I am looking for a 200K package instead of saying, hey, I am making like 150K.
Yeah, I've seen these tips around ask for X% more. We like to tell them to turn it around and say, what's your total budget? And a lot of people get confused between what's posted on the job post, because by law, companies have to post a range in many states in the US in their job description, the salary range. That is not the true budget and not the total budget. And people get confused on that. So you can ask, the recruiter will probably not tell you, or the hiring manager will probably not tell you the absolute true budget. Can you actually, since we're on that topic, you said you had full control over your budget. Can you walk us through an end-to-end process? So let's say you have an open seat. You're like, okay, I opened this seat, I want to hire. How did you determine the budget, the flexibility? Did you have to run it by anyone else? And if someone is negotiating, did you have to flex, or you start somewhere in the middle and now you have room?
Yeah, so it wasn't like, hey, you get this position and you get 150K. Basically, you're like, hey, for this year, you have 50 million, right? So then you take that 50 million and you're like, well, with this 50, well, maybe this is inflated, but with this 50 million, this is your budget for the department. Maybe you have $3 million to hire people. So then I would take that. I'm like, okay, well, who can I hire and what do we need? Do I hire 5 senior engineer and 2 junior? Do I hire 1 manager and 2 individual contributor? So then when I negotiated, because I had the set budget, so every department has a set budget, a yearly set budget, and then a quarterly set budget. So if let's say I would give a candidate more money, then they better be more senior, right? Because then the next candidate I can't hire as big of it, like
Right.
of
There's a trade-off.
There's a trade-off. As an executive, higher up you go, depending on who you're negotiating, you have more and more flexibility. So if let's say I'm hiring for a mid-level engineer, but that person really is on the cusp of being senior and they wanted more than the salary band, then I would say, okay, you know what? Because they're more senior, and then I can hire a junior engineer after to kind of report to them, I will go up in the salary band
Instead of a peer.
instead of a
Of a
peer.
more
So that's kind of how my mindset would go in when hiring. But every hiring manager, right, I think even if you're an engineering manager and you're reporting to a director, usually you can always go higher, especially if you think that that person is more senior. So in the interview process, maybe focus on showing that you're maybe a little bit more senior than the role, and that if you want to negotiate higher than the band, then that gives you really good leverage, because the person can say, okay, well, you know what, this salary band is for intermediate, but you're really senior, so I can go a little bit higher.
Yeah, that's great to get a peek into that. I'm trying to think through. So let's say you had a new open seat. Did you have a specific budget for that role that's like, okay, we're going to pay, I don't know, 300 total, for example, but you start the offer with like, hey, here's our initial offer, 250. If they negotiate, you go up to 300. Or do you pull the entire budget and you're like, I have 3 million. I'm going to start with 250. Let's see how much they negotiate. But I guess you can go even beyond.
So typically, yes, that's how hiring manager did, but because I wanted to be as fair as possible, especially for women, like I did not want to give them a lower offer. I wanted to make sure that everybody was getting paid equally. So I would actually just offer them what I think they were worth. Like, and then I would
Based on what? Market data?
yeah.
Or?
So basically, one of the ways to kind of remove this unconscious bias is to have very clear bands for very clear seniority. So we had like P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, and the
levels.
bands maybe like ranged by 10, 15K. But then when we were evaluating them, we had a rubric. So that's another way to counter unconscious bias, where we would like rate a candidate the same way in every single one, and they would go through the exact same process, and through that rubric it would determine the band.
Got it.
So like through that rubric, let's say we determined their P3, then I probably had 10 to 15K in flexibility,
I see.
and I would meet them halfway. But also because in negotiation, right, I would never try to throw the first number. I would always try to see where they're at and where the range is at. But even when I presented the offer, the first call that I had with them, I wanted to get to know them and what motivated them. I never really came up with, hey, this is, 180K. I would say, hey, I want to offer you this role because like some people are really motivated because they want to get to the next position very high. So I would come in and I would say, well, hey, I want to offer you this role, but this is the career path that would get you to engineering manager, for example. And then I would open up with a number, and that always almost work. Or if someone is very mission driven, I would say the same thing. And also sometimes the women, a lot of us wanted to start families and we needed flexibility, or we are moms and work-life balance matters more to us than salary, right? So I would try to determine that, and whatever motivates the person, I would open it up with that instead of the salary range.
Yeah, that's very cool. And what stage was Mindbody when you were doing this? Like
So-
series?
It was a public company.
Oh, it was already
It was a
public.
public
Yeah.
company, and then we got bought by the biggest private equity firm on the
That's
planet,
very cool.
Vista. So we went from public to private.
Wow. Okay. That's so interesting because that really puts things into perspective. Equity had an actual dollar amount attached to it. Yeah.
Exactly. The equity was, okay, at the end of the year, this is how much it's worth.
So when you're interviewing candidates, in what situations where a candidate did something, you felt, okay, you know what, I'm actually going to give a really big comp increase because of this? Or is it really just based on the...
I'm also curious if you've ever rescinded offers and why.
I think, I rescinded an offer when I did a backdoor check, and then the person was like, no, this person is really horrible to work with. So then at that point, I did rescind the offer. And I think in another case, and it's not at Mindbody, another case I rescinded the offer because like we basically got a cut in budget, and that happens a lot. Let's say you have a certain budget per quarter and then priorities change, and then you have to rescind the offer because you no longer have that budget. And it's always unfortunate, and I almost try never to do that, but it's like in exceptional cases sometimes you have to.
Yeah, with rescinded offers, it reminded me of something you were saying earlier, just to not lie or to not misrepresent anything. And a really big reason, first of all, with all the ethical considerations there, but just like how anyone in any role, you're probably part of different communities or groups. If you're a PM, you're probably in Facebook groups or LinkedIn groups of like PMs and tech or whatnot. Recruiters also have those groups, and it's such a small world, not just in San Francisco, but also in the HR and the recruiting world. They often know other recruiters at many other companies, and it's very common for them to just ping the recruiter at the company that you're from or that you're applying to. They're like, hey, do you know this person? And when you said that you always do that backdoor check and the back channeling, that reminded me how often I've been hit up by friends who work at certain companies that said, hey, I see that you're connected to this person. What are your thoughts about them? That I get maybe at least one of those every other month from different friends across companies. So much is happening behind the scenes outside of the interview process and the negotiation. And that, I think that's a really good reminder that you shared.
That's why I do not name drop if it's fake, because it's such a close circle that you will almost always get caught. And if you don't get caught in the offer stage, you're most likely going to get caught when you start working. And that's even worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I feel like we can talk all day. Any final thoughts in general or any stories that have stood out for you? And I did want to circle back to Alex's question, which was, what would make you give someone the highest possible offer? What has worked?
Yeah, I think if, let's say, I'm hiring for a mid-level engineer, and then let's say that person came into the interview process and they did really well, and then they told me about times where they did like a senior level role and everybody loved them and they crushed the interview process, and then that's at a point where I'm like, okay, that person is really senior and we could really use them. They would fit great in this company and I don't want to lose them because I know they might have like 3 other offer. So that's when I would come really strong to make sure that no matter what, we get them. And I think it happened less actually, now that I'm remembering, like in mid-level position and more in staff level position. When you're hiring for, let's say, a staff level engineer and you have maybe 1 or 2 position open and you come across like an amazing staff level engineer that can actually impact the entire department, then you don't want to risk losing them by giving them a lower number. So the higher up you get, I think the higher of this like the more important it is to hire the right person. And it's so hard to find that when you find them, you want to give them everything you have.
Love that. Okay, well, I think we can wrap up here. Thank you so much for coming to chat with us. Thank you for all the work that you do, especially on, well, community building, but supporting women. I hope we can have you again soon.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
This was so
you.
fun.